My parents looked me in the eye across the polished surface of their dining room table and told me they were selling my heart. They were selling the century-old family farm, the rolling hills I knew better than my own reflection, the ancient oak tree my great-grandfather had planted, the rambling farmhouse that held every happy memory of my childhood. And they were selling it all to fund my brother's ridiculously lavish wedding. They told me his happiness, a single day of extravagant celebration, was more important than our entire family's history. They had no idea that the wealthy, mysterious man they were selling it to was my secret business partner, and that I would be the one to give the final, binding word on the deal. The announcement came, as most of my family's decrees did, during a tense Sunday dinner. The air was already thick with the cloying sweetness of my brother Leo's self-satisfaction. He and his new fiancée, a woman named Tiffany, with diamonds in her ears and ice in her veins, were holding court, describing in nauseating detail the wedding they were planning. It was a production worthy of a royal family, involving a guest list of 300, a 10-piece band, and a custom-designed dress that cost more than my car. I had been listening in quiet disbelief, wondering how they could possibly afford such a spectacle. My father and my uncle's construction company, the business that had supported our family for 50 years, was, I knew, struggling to stay afloat. And then my father cleared his throat, and the shoe I had been waiting for finally dropped. "Kids," he began, looking at Leo and me, though his gaze slid past me almost immediately, "your mother and I have some wonderful news. We've been thinking long and hard about how to give you, Leo, and your lovely fiancé the wedding you truly deserve, a proper start to your new life together." My mother beamed, reaching over to squeeze Tiffany's hand. "We know things have been a bit tight lately, but some things are more important than money. Family is more important." The irony of that statement was a physical, bitter taste in my mouth. I felt a cold dread begin to creep up my spine. I knew what was coming. "So," my father continued, looking at me, his eyes full of a sort of preemptive apology, "we've made a decision. We're putting the farm on the market. We've already had a very generous offer from a private investor. It's more than enough to cover the wedding and give you a very comfortable nest egg, son." The room erupted. Leo and Tiffany were ecstatic, hugging my parents, their faces alight with greedy, triumphant joy. "Oh my God, Dad, you're the best!" Leo shouted. Tiffany was already pulling out her phone, no doubt to upgrade the floral arrangements. I just sat there, the fork frozen halfway to my mouth. The sounds of their celebration faded into a dull roaring in my ears. The farm. They were selling the farm. They were selling the porch swing where my grandmother taught me to read. They were selling the barn where my grandfather taught me how to drive a tractor. They were selling the creek where I spent my summers. The apple orchard that smelled like heaven in the autumn. The very soil that held the roots of my entire identity. "No," I finally whispered, the word a small, broken sound in the midst of their jubilation. They all stopped and looked at me, their happy expressions turning to annoyance. "What do you mean, no?" my mother asked, her tone sharp.
"You can't sell the farm," I said, my voice growing stronger. "Dad, that's Grandpa's legacy. It's our history. You can't just sell it for a party." "It's not just a party, Nina," my brother said, rolling his eyes. "It's my wedding. It's the start of my future." "And what about our past?" I shot back, my voice rising with a passion I rarely showed them. "What about Grandpa? What about everything he and Grandma built? We can find another way. I have savings. I can help. We can take out a loan. We don't have to erase our entire history for a single day of extravagance." My aunt's cruel words from years ago echoed in my head. Dreamy Sophie. Now I was sentimental Nina, the impractical one who cared more about old trees than her own brother's happiness. My mother's face hardened. "Don't be so selfish, Nina," she said, her voice cold. "Your little savings, as you call them, wouldn't even cover the catering for a wedding like this. You're just being jealous because your brother has found someone and is able to have the kind of celebration you never did." The cruelty of her words was breathtaking. She was right. My own wedding to my ex-husband had been a small, simple affair at a courthouse, but it had been my choice. To have her throw it in my face now as a weapon to justify this desecration of our family's memory was a new low, even for her. I looked at my father, my last hope. "Dad, please." He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared down at his plate, shrugging his shoulders. "It's decided, Nina. Your brother deserves this." That was it. The final verdict. My brother deserved to have his lavish party, and I deserved to have my heart ripped out and sold to the highest bidder. I pushed my chair back from the table, my appetite gone, my soul aching with a grief so profound it felt like a physical illness. "Excuse me," I said, my voice a choked whisper. "I'm not feeling well." I fled their house, their renewed, cheerful chatter about wedding venues and honeymoon destinations chasing me out the door. I drove home in a blur of tears and a white-hot, impotent rage. They had dismissed my love, my history, my very being as simple sentimentality. They saw the farm as a simple asset to be liquidated. They couldn't see that they weren't just selling land, they were selling my soul. I sat in my own quiet apartment, a place that was modern, successful, and a world away from the dreamy girl they all still saw me as. I looked at the old framed photograph on my mantelpiece, a picture of me as a little girl sitting on my grandfather's lap on the porch of the farmhouse. His arm was wrapped around me, his face crinkled in a wide, loving smile. My tears subsided, and the grief in my chest began to cool, hardening into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. They had made their decision. They thought the sale was a done deal. They thought the final word was theirs. But my grandfather hadn't just taught me how to drive a tractor. He had taught me how to be patient, how to be strategic, and how to protect the things you love. "I won't let them do it, Grandpa," I whispered to the photograph. "I promise." They thought the story was over, but I knew the most important chapter was just about to begin. I sat in the sterile silence of my apartment, the echoes of my family's cheerful, dismissive voices still ringing in my ears. The rage and grief from the night before had cooled, coalescing into a hard, heavy stone of resolve in my gut. I looked around my home, a space I had curated myself, filled with clean lines, contemporary art, and books on architectural theory. It was the home of a successful, independent woman, a woman my family had never bothered to meet. To them, I was still sentimental Nina, the impractical dreamer with the useless art history degree, a perpetual supporting character in the grand, important story of my brother, Leo. This dynamic was as old as we were. Leo was the golden boy, the sun around which my parents' world revolved. His achievements, no matter how small, were celebrated with fanfare. His failures were cushioned, his mistakes excused. When he wanted a new car for his 16th birthday, they bought him a sporty convertible. When I turned 16, I was given a buzz pass and a lecture on the importance of self-sufficiency. When he scraped through college with a business degree and a C average, they threw him a lavish graduation party. When I graduated with honors and a departmental prize, they told me it was nice, but worried about my job prospects. I was always expected to be the understanding one, the one who didn't make waves, the one who would graciously step aside so that Leo's light could shine brighter. And for years, in the name of a fragile family peace, I had played my part. My true life, my real self, had been nurtured not in their house of shifting praise and quiet judgment, but in the rich, dark soil of the farm.
While Leo had spent his summers at expensive camps or lounging by the country club pool, I had spent mine trailing my grandfather through the fields. He was a man of the earth, his hands calloused, his knowledge of the land profound. He didn't just teach me how to drive the old John Deere tractor. He taught me about crop rotation, about soil health, about the delicate ecosystem of the creek that bordered our property. He would let me sit with him in his dusty office as he went over the farm's accounts, explaining the slim profit margins, the gamble of weather, the hard-won dignity of building something with your own two hands. I loved the farm, not just for its beauty, but because I understood its soul, its struggle, its resilience. It was a living, breathing part of me. My useless art history degree had been a rebellion, a quiet insistence on pursuing my own passion, but it had also been my salvation. With the focus on architectural history and land preservation, I found my way into a niche, specialized field. I began my career at a firm that appraised historical properties for conservation trusts. I had a knack for it. I could see the hidden value in a dilapidated old barn or a forgotten Victorian manor. I understood that history itself had value. It was during an appraisal of a massive historical estate that I met him, Mr. Alistair Grayson. He was a self-made real estate magnate, a legendary figure in the industry known for his shrewd business sense and, more recently, for his philanthropic efforts in land preservation. He was the potential buyer of the estate I was appraising. He was brilliant, intimidating, and he saw something in me that my own family never had. He was impressed not just by my knowledge, but by my passion. He saw that I understood that land wasn't just a commodity. It was a story.
He became my mentor. He hired me away from the appraisal firm, making me his personal consultant. And about a year ago, he had come to me with a proposal. He wanted to start a new, specialized venture, a firm dedicated to acquiring historic farms and agricultural lands, not to be broken up for suburban developments, but to be revitalized, restored, and turned into sustainable, profitable enterprises like organic wineries or ecotourism destinations. He wanted me to be his partner, not just an employee, but a silent majority partner. Grayson and Wallace Land Holdings, he'd said, using my mother's maiden name as a nod to my own legacy. You have the vision, Nina. I have the capital. Together we can save these beautiful places. I had kept my success a secret from my family. It was an act of self-preservation. I knew with absolute certainty how they would react. They would not be proud. They would either mock my success as a fluke or, far worse, they would immediately see it as a new, vast resource to be tapped for their own needs, for Leo's needs. My silence was a shield, protecting the one part of my life that was truly, wholly mine. And now, they were planning to sell the one place on earth that tied me to my past, the very inspiration for my career, to fund a one-day spectacle of gaudy excess for the son they had always valued more. The news of their decision had sent me into a spiral of grief, but after the tears had dried, I called Mr. Grayson. I told him the situation, my voice tight with a pain he immediately understood. "This is what we do, Nina," he had said, his voice calm and steady. "We save places like this from people like them. If you want to save that farm, we will save it." The plan was born from that conversation. It was simple, elegant, and ruthless. Mr. Grayson's firm, operating through an anonymous holding company, would make a ridiculously generous all-cash offer for the farm. An offer so high, no other legitimate buyer could compete. We would let the sale proceed all the way to the final signing. I would give my family every possible chance to reconsider, to see the monumental nature of their betrayal. The final decision, the final veto power,
would be mine alone. My secret weapon wasn't just my wealth or my powerful partner. It was the contract they were so eager to sign. As I prepared for the meeting at the lawyer's office, a profound sadness settled over me. I was sad that it had come to this. Sad that I couldn't have a simple, honest conversation with my own parents. Sad that their love was so conditional, their blindness so complete. But beneath the sadness was a layer of hard, unyielding steel. I was no longer sentimental Nina, the dreamy girl whose feelings could be easily dismissed. I was Miss Wallace, a partner in a multi-million-dollar land development firm, and I was about to protect my most valuable asset. The meeting was not an execution. It was a final exam, and I had a terrible feeling. My family was about to fail. The day of the sale arrived with a cold gray sky that perfectly matched the feeling in my soul. I did not dress for a funeral, though that's what it felt like. I dressed for war. I chose a charcoal gray power suit, sharply tailored, and heels that made a firm, confident click on the pavement. I pulled my hair back into a severe, professional knot. There would be no trace of sentimental Nina today. When I looked in the mirror, a stranger looked back at me, a woman my family had never met. Cool, composed, and armed with a quiet, righteous fury.
The drive to the lawyer's office was a journey through a gallery of ghosts. Every landmark, every street corner held a memory of my father, of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else now. I felt a final, foolish ping of hope in my chest, a desperate wish that I would walk into that office and my father would look at me and say, "You were right, Nina. We can't do this." It was a child's hope, and I knew it was destined to be crushed. The law office was as sterile and impersonal as I had imagined. It was a conference room on the 23rd floor of a downtown skyscraper, a space designed for transactions, not for mourning the death of a family's legacy. They were all already there when I arrived, seated around a long, polished mahogany table. The atmosphere was thick with a strange mixture of feigned solemnity and barely concealed, giddy excitement. My brother, Leo, and his fiancée, Tiffany, were huddled together at one end of the table, whispering excitedly over a glossy wedding magazine, their fingers pointing at pictures of extravagant floral arrangements. They were so lost in the fantasy of their perfect day that they seemed to have forgotten entirely what was being sacrificed to pay for it. They were children being handed a credit card with a limit they couldn't comprehend. My parents sat at the center of the table, trying to project an air of grave importance, a performance for the lawyers in the room. But I could see the excitement glittering in their eyes. I could see the relief. The sale of the farm wasn't just funding a wedding. It was erasing decades of their own financial mismanagement, a clean slate bought with my history. My mother saw me first. "Oh, Nina, you came," she said, her voice laced with a patronizing pity. "I wasn't sure if you would. Don't worry, dear. It will all be over soon. Try not to get too emotional." "I'm fine, Mom," I said, my voice colder than I intended. I took the single empty chair at the far end of the table, as far from them as possible, placing my briefcase firmly on the floor beside me. A moment later, the door opened and their lawyer announced that the buyer's representative had arrived. Mr. Alistair Grayson walked into the room. He was the very picture of quiet, old money power, his suit impeccably tailored, his silver hair perfectly coiffed. He radiated an aura of such immense wealth and authority that the entire room seemed to suck in a collective breath. My parents and my uncle were immediately on their feet, their hands outstretched, fawning over him like courtiers before a king. Leo and Tiffany just stared, starstruck. Mr. Grayson was a consummate actor. He greeted my parents with a polite, professional warmth. He shook my brother's hand. His eyes swept over me, and for a fraction of a second, he gave me a cool, professional glance of acknowledgement before moving on, giving no sign that we were anything more than strangers. I played my part, offering a small, distant nod. The stage was set. The lawyers began their droning preamble, explaining the legal jargon of the thick contracts that sat in a neat stack in the center of the table. I didn't listen to the words. I knew every clause, every subsection by heart. I had helped draft them. Instead, I watched my family. I watched them nod along, pretending to understand, their eyes glazed over with impatience, eager to get to the final page, to the signatures, to the money. This was it. This was their final chance. The last opportunity for one of them to have a crisis of conscience, to look at what they were doing and say, "Stop, this is wrong." I scanned their faces, searching for a flicker of doubt, of remorse, of love. I found none. I found only greed, entitlement, and a profound, unshakable certainty that they were doing the right thing. The lawyer finally finished. "Well," he said, "if there are no further questions, I believe we are ready for the signatures." He slid the heavy stack of papers towards my father. A desperate final plea rose in my throat. I had to try, one last time. For my grandfather, for myself. "Dad," I said, my voice quiet but clear in the silent room, "are you absolutely sure about this? Once you signed that paper, there is no going back. It's gone forever." Every head turned towards me. My mother shot me a look of pure venom. "Nina, do not start," she hissed. "She's just being dramatic," Leo sighed, rolling his eyes at Tiffany, who giggled. My father looked at me, his expression not one of anger, but of weary impatience. "It's for the best, Nina," he said, his voice flat. "This is what's best for the family." And there it was, the final rejection, the final confirmation that my feelings, my history, my very connection to their shared past meant nothing. The last ember of my foolish hope died, leaving nothing but cold, hard ash. My internal turning point was complete. I had given them their chance. They had failed the test. My father picked up the heavy, expensive fountain pen the lawyer had provided. He unscrewed the cap, the small sound echoing in the silent room. He took a deep, final breath, ready to sacrifice his legacy for his son's temporary happiness. The room was silent with anticipation. The pen touched the paper. "One moment, please." The voice was not loud, but it cut through the silence of the room with the force of a judge's gavel. It was Mr. Grayson. He had been sitting silently beside his own lawyer, a figure of calm, inscrutable power, observing the proceedings with an unreadable expression. Now he was looking at my father, his hand up in a quiet, commanding gesture. My father froze, the pen hovering just above the paper, his expression one of pure, undisguised annoyance. "Is there a problem, Mr. Grayson?" he asked, his tone strained. "Not a problem," Mr. Grayson said smoothly, a slow, deliberate smile touching his lips for the first time that day. He rose to his feet, a commanding presence in the stuffy, generic room. "Just a final point of protocol I seem to have neglected. My apologies." He walked slowly to the head of the table, his eyes sweeping over my parents, then over Leo and Tiffany, before finally landing on me. The look he gave me was not one of a stranger. It was one of deep, conspiratorial respect. A look that said, "Are you ready?" I gave the slightest, almost imperceptible nod. "It is a magnificent piece of land," Mr. Grayson began, his voice a calm, resonant baritone that filled the room. "A property with a rich history and, I believe, with the right stewardship, an even richer future. My firm, Grayson and Wallace Land Holdings, is very excited about its potential." I saw my parents puff up with pride at his words. My mother shot a triumphant look at me, as if to say, "See, even this important man understands what a great opportunity this is." "However," Mr. Grayson continued, "we have a very strict protocol for acquisitions of this nature, especially for properties with such deep historical significance. It's a matter of company policy, a non-negotiable part of our due diligence process." He paused, letting the suspense build,
his gaze still fixed on me. "Your partner?" my mother asked, her voice laced with confusion. "Is he not here? Do we need to wait?" "He is not here, no." He then delivered the 10 words that I will remember for the rest of my life, the words my father had planned with me, the words that would change everything. He spoke them slowly, clearly, and with undeniable authority. "I cannot buy this farm without my partner's final approval." The family stared at him, completely baffled. Leo looked at his father, then at the lawyer, his brow furrowed. "I don't understand. Who is your partner? Why wasn't this mentioned before?" Mr. Grayson ignored them. He did not look at them. He did not acknowledge their questions. Instead, he turned his entire body to face me, sitting alone at the far end of the cable. The entire room followed his gaze, and for the first time that day, for the first time in years, my entire family was looking at me, truly looking, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning apprehension. Mr. Grayson's expression softened into one of polite, professional deference. And then he asked the question that detonated their world. "Well, Nina," he asked, his voice ringing with a quiet, devastating clarity in the silent room. "As the majority partner and the co-founder of our firm, what do you say? Do we have your approval to proceed with the acquisition?" The sound of my father dropping the expensive fountain pen on the mahogany table was like a gunshot. It clattered and rolled, leaving a small black streak of ink on the polished surface. But no one noticed, no one moved, no one breathed. The sequence of emotions that washed over my family's faces was a sight to behold. It was a brutal, beautiful, and terrible thing. I saw my mother's confusion curdle into disbelief, her hand flying to her throat as she choked on a silent gasp. I saw my brother's smug entitlement melt away, leaving behind a pale, slack-jawed shock. I saw his fiancée, Tiffany, staring at me, her dreams of a lavish 6-figure wedding visibly dying in her wide, horrified eyes. And I saw my father. He looked at me, his face ashen, his eyes filled with the look of such profound, soul-crushing comprehension that it almost broke my heart. He finally understood. He understood my useless degree, my boring office job, my quiet confidence. He understood the full, catastrophic scope of his betrayal and the quiet, hidden power of the daughter he had dismissed his entire life. The entire room was silent, waiting for my answer. For the first time in my life, my entire family was waiting, with bated breath, to hear what I had to say. I held their future in the palm of my hand, and I knew exactly what my answer would be. The silence in the conference room was a tangible thing, a heavy, suffocating blanket woven from my family's shattered expectations. Every eye was on me. Mr. Grayson's question, "Do we have your approval to proceed?" hung in the air, a formal, polite query that held the power to detonate a family. I looked at each of them, truly looked at them, my gaze sweeping across the table. I saw my mother, her face a mask of pale, desperate hope, her mind already spending the money. I saw my brother Leo and his fiancée Tiffany, their expressions greedy and expectant, their entire future predicated on the destruction of my entire past. And I saw my father, his eyes pleading with me, not for forgiveness, but for complicity. He wanted me to sign off on my own heartbreak to make his life easier. In that long, silent moment, I felt the last vestiges of sentimental Nina fall away like a snake shedding its skin. I was not the family's emotional shock absorber anymore. I was not the quiet, dreamy girl to be patronized. I was Miss Wallace, the majority partner of Grayson and Wallace Land Holdings, and this was a business decision. I finally rose to my feet, my movement slow and deliberate. The scrape of my chair on the floor sounded like a thunderclap in the silent room. First, I addressed my partner. "Thank you for asking, Alistair," I said, my voice as calm and steady as a frozen river. "And thank you for your faith in this project. But no, we will not be proceeding with the acquisition. The deal is off." Then I turned my full attention to my family. "The farm," I said, my voice low but carrying to every corner of the room, "is not for sale." I looked directly at my father, my heart aching for the man he should have been. "It was never just land, Dad. It was the oak tree you fell out of when you were 7. It was the barn where Grandpa taught me about honor and hard work. It was the place Mom's ashes were scattered by the creek. It was never, ever just an asset on a balance sheet." My gaze shifted to my brother, his face now a picture of dawning, horrified disbelief. "And it is not a piggy bank to be smashed open for a one-day party, Leo," I said, my voice hardening. "The wedding you and Tiffany want will have to be paid for. Paid for with something you have earned, not something you have stolen from the memory of our family." The dam of their composure broke. "How could you?" my mother shrieked, her voice cracking with fury. "After everything we've done for you, you selfish, vengeful girl, you would ruin your own brother's happiness out of pure spite." "My happiness?" Leo sputtered, his face turning a blotchy, furious red. "Nina, you can't do this. This is my future, Tiffany's future. You've destroyed everything." Tiffany, beside him, had dissolved into theatrical, gulping sobs, her perfect wedding turning to dust before her eyes. I did not engage. I did not argue. There was nothing left to say. I had spent a lifetime trying to explain my feelings to them, and they had never once listened. They would not start now. I simply looked at my father, whose face was ashen, his eyes filled with a look of utter, soul-crushing defeat. He knew. He finally knew the true cost of what he had been willing to do. I bent down, picked up my briefcase, and gave a single respectful nod to Mr. Grayson and his legal team. "Thank you for your time," I said. Then, without another glance at the imploding remnants of my family, I turned and walked out of the conference room, my heels clicking a steady, confident rhythm on the polished floor. I left them behind in the wreckage of their own making, their shouts and sobs a chaotic, impotent symphony of their greed. The weeks that followed were quiet, sad unraveling. I didn't answer their calls, which ranged from furious to pleading to manipulative. I heard through a sympathetic cousin what was happening. Tiffany, seeing that the river of money had dried up, had called off the engagement, telling Leo she couldn't possibly marry into a family with such financial instability. My parents, I was told, were barely speaking, consumed by a bitter, circular argument of blame. My father had locked himself away, heartbroken over the loss of his legacy and the loss of his daughter's respect. The family I knew had fractured, not because of what I had done, but because my actions had finally exposed the deep, rotten cracks that had been there all along. A year has passed. Through Grayson and Wallace, I used my own capital to buy out my uncle's share of the farm and invested heavily in revitalizing it. It is no longer a struggling, neglected property. It's a thriving, sustainable organic farm and a small educational retreat for agricultural students, exactly as my grandfather had always dreamed it could be. I didn't save it to hoard it. I saved it to make it better. My father visited me at the farm last month. It was the first time we had spoken in a year. He looked older, humbled. He walked the fields with me, his eyes full of a sad wonder at what I had built. "He would be so proud of you, Nina," he had whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Your grandfather, and I am so so sorry. It was a real apology, finally. An apology for not just that one day, but for a lifetime of not truly seeing me. As for my mother and Leo, I do not know what has become of them. I chose to let them go. This evening, I stood on the porch of the old farmhouse, watching the sun set over the rolling hills, the same hills my family was so willing to sell. They had tried to sell my past to pay for my brother's future. Instead, I had claimed my past, and in doing so, had built a future for myself that was stronger and more authentic than anything they could have imagined. My vindication wasn't in their ruin. It was here, in the scent of the rich soil, in the quiet dignity of my grandfather's legacy, in the profound peace of knowing I had protected the things that money can never, ever buy. A truly powerful story about legacy, respect, and the price of greed. What do you think of Nina's final decision? Was she right to do what she did? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We love to hear your perspective on these complex family dramas. If you enjoyed this satisfying story of vindication, please show your support by hitting that like button and be sure to subscribe for more daily stories of karma and justice. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.